And our next presenter is Alex Brum. Alex will be talking about the Florida experience. Alex worked for HNTB. He's the project manager on Florida DOT Central Office TSMNO GEC. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Judith. All right. So one of the things we're going to go over here is how the department comes up with its positions, its funding. It's essentially it's our TMC workload. You can see a TMC here a lot. It is kind of a TMS synonym. One of the things we do is we poll the districts annually. So we'll send out surveys that have questions, how many center lane miles of freeway are you managing? How many ramp meters there are? In later slides, we'll go into how those responses go into the formula and help us determine the funding needs. FDOT has 10 regional transportation management centers and 2 satellite transportation centers. Florida is very different as it comes out. The Panhandle is different than South Florida, which is different than the East Coast. Different topographies, different population densities, and those all come with their own unique challenges. Florida's DOTs operate on a 24/7 basis. However, the staffing levels do vary throughout the day, as well as throughout the week and throughout the year. And we'll go into that a little bit further. We work very closely with our stakeholders to address incidents on the roadway. And Florida hosts a lot of special events that greatly impact traffic conditions. There's Art Festival World Cup in 2026. So the TMCs need to start early staging and planning around those events. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going a little bit onto our facility type. The surveys do also break it up by facility type. So freeways, express lanes, and arterials are all different. And then there's also different qualifying criteria for things like ramp meters, truck parking, things like that. We also, I guess the surveys also take into account how many events an operator can manage, and the number of express lanes, the numbers of ramp meters, those translates to how many operators need to be within the TMC at a given time. Next slide. All right, so some of the things that we talk about when estimating our staffing needs. So as I mentioned, we look into center lane miles. We take a historical amount of traffic incidents and events, look at it from a per mile perspective, because that is one of the best ways for us to normalize the data. And then we kind of take that into account for time of day, day of week, and then events per operator. And that's sort of how we determine our staffing need at that level. Number of TMCs also comes into account. TMCs also have unique software, unique staff. You'll see later in the formulas that each TMC needs a shift lead, a manager, reception, things like that. So depending on the responses, there are certain attributes that come in. Number of signals here, just like we mentioned earlier, traffic signals, ramp meters, and express lanes all play a determining need in the funding levels. If there are at least 30 traffic signals that are actively managed, then that TMC or that district will receive an arterial operator. We do look at actively managed signals, not total signals, so signals that have response plans, timing, things like that. And we only staff operators for arterials on weekdays. Ramp meters, the formula assumes that each operator can handle a maximum of 40 ramp meters. So if the district has 41, that gets rounded to 2 because there's no fractional folks here. Our ramp meters are only in use 8 hours a day, not necessarily consecutively, and only on weekdays. So that's kind of what we meant earlier when we said the staffing level varies throughout the day, throughout the week. If there are express lanes in a district, that will also greatly add to its staffing needs and its resources. We have specific express lane management resources. We almost consider them a unique roadway. They have their own devices. They have their own operators. 25 miles of express lanes per operator is what we determined to be adequate. And the express lanes are staffed 24/7, 365. As everyone knows, traffic operations is a quickly changing field. So we do work with our districts constantly. And if we see roles that are being added and kind of standardized, like IT support, public relations personnel, we work with the districts to incorporate those into standard roles. The districts are welcome to hire additional personnel, such as a data scientist. But what central office funds is the standardized roles. Next slide, please. All right, so the next couple of slides are just some examples of how we go over it. So the supervisors are very straightforward. How we estimate the need, we take the loaded bill rate, multiply that by 24 by 365, and that's how we get our coverage. The operators are a little more complicated. It's still the loaded rate times 24 times 365, but the number of operators vary. As we kind of mentioned, we take into account days of week, incidents, things like that. We have 6 operator staffing time periods. Weekdays, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., weekdays, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., weekdays, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and then the same for the weekends, 6 to 2, 2 to 10, 10 to 6. When we look at our historical data and we see how many incidents there are during that time frame, that helps us determine the level of staffing needed during that time frame. All right, we also assume, because we are in a 5-year work program, we do assume a 2% growth rate in incidents. So that's something we do revisit it every couple of years, but we do a 2% annual increase, and we do also assume 2.5 events per operator. Number of incidents can also vary by time of year. FDOT has seasonal operators as well. Similar process, we look at the incidents, although instead of time of day, we would look at month of year. Training and retention is a big focus of the department. So our formulas also account for various skill sets and experience levels. This could be done for something such as a senior operator or an IT technician level 2, which will account for additional funding. Next slide, please. Here we just kind of have a shot of some of the other roles we have here that are standardized: assistant TMC manager, public relations, reception. And then here we go a little bit to more of the formulas and how we staff for them. You'll see here that if there are express lanes, we do add additional hours per week for management, as they do have their own projects that come out of that, and very quick response time on those. Next slide, please. All right, so the department's Traffic Engineering and Operations Office, they submit a TMC operations budget to the FDOT work program on a 5-year basis. The TMC operation staffing formula includes an annual inflation factor, and we happen to use the fiscal year inflation factors determined by FDOT's transportation cost report. Once we've identified the correct number of staff for the optimal TMC workload, we do add a region adjusted factor. Again, this would be because some areas such as the Panhandle or the middle of the state are less expensive for resources as the South or the East Coast. We also determine the location by reviewing TMC contracts throughout the state. So every couple of years, we'll pull all the TMC operations contracts. We'll look at those rates. As everyone on the call knows, the inflation factor hasn't necessarily always kept up with cost increases. So we do like to revisit what the districts are paying per roles, and so we can get a better estimate of what will be needed in the future. Next slide, please. All right, and then just here's kind of a recap of our best practices. We mentioned that Florida has seasonal operators. We do have, I think it's 100 million visitors a year. So certain parts of the state have an influx and they like to staff around those. Regional factors, because cost, labor, and goods all may cost more in different parts of the state. It is important to review for new rates in case the cost of services outpace the planned CPI inflation. Again, the department is very big on training and retaining operators. A lot of the ways they do that is by allowing more senior level classifications for folks to grow into the role, and also, very clear determined career paths to go from operator, lead operator, shift manager, things like that. Talked about inflation factors as well. We do have one that's built in, and then we do like to keep an eye on it. Ratio of operators to managers, kind of talked about how we have a shift manager, we have operators based on the number of events and number of incidents. We do have regular contract reviews. Something that's interesting in our TMCs is because oftentimes we're co-located with Florida Highway Patrol or other agencies, we do have a pretty rigorous background check for our TMC operators, just given the sensitive nature of what they'll be having access to. Several districts have performance-based contracts where there are certain criteria and metrics that must be met. by the operators, on-site performance, turnaround times, especially when there are express lanes or dynamically priced assets. That response time is very critical. We do add positions based on industry growth. We add in a growth rate per year. And like I mentioned earlier, we are co-located. Ultimately, it's a balance between costs and returns. If you want to staff it to the point where the needs are met, but there isn't an excess or a lull in there. And then the department corresponds a lot with stakeholders, first responders, and other folks that are needed to kind of help us with incident management or express lanes. Next slide. That's ultimately it. Thank you.